Dear God in heaven, we thank you for this Sabbath day. We thank you that we can set aside all the craziness of the week and just reset and refocus our attention on what is really important. And what is important is methodology, um, what is happening with external events, and um, the relationships that we have with each other in this movement. So we leave ourselves in your care. We pray for a blessing now with understanding is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. So for a little while now, I've been distracted and busy, which is not a great place to be when you're on the borders of the Sunday law. So I appreciate the Sabbath and our church family because it's the discussions that we have with each other that try and keep us in a parable world. So I think it's critical that we press together because there's lots of things happening in all our lives of varying degrees that keeps us distracted away from what we really should be doing. And so I had a discussion with Graham a couple of weeks ago when Elder Parminder was here about a topic I wasn't really familiar with, and I wasn't familiar with the details. And it just so happened, because of my distraction, because of being crazy busy with lots of different things, I had actually missed two presentations of Parminders, Elder Parminders, from the 6th and 7th of April. Now, I don't normally miss presentations, but I did. And so I watched them. And what they were on methodology and how Elder Parminder wanted to redirect the movement back to methodology, to correct methodology. And it's important now because people in the movement are bringing out different models or prophecy, we'll call it prophecy, or arguments, basically for the history we're presently walking through. And so, as Elder Terry would say, we need to sift external information, but it's not just external information. She would also say we need to sift. If we have to sift externally, what else do we have to do? We have to sift internally. And how can we sift internal information if we haven't got a very good handle on methodology? And so Elder Parminder's identified this, and so that's why he did what he did, and I missed it, unfortunately. So what I'm doing this morning is this introduction is part introduction of probably this, plus it'll probably go into more presentation, but it's also part testimony as well. Just to explain the experience that I had as I went through navigating this topic. And so these presentations that Elder Parminder did, he was basically answering questions as he normally does in a lot of presentations in the current history. And he basically, I'll just find my spot, bear with me. This is how he explained methodology. So he said, how do we get to a model? How do we get to prophecy? And he said this. He said, And chime in, please. This is very interactive, this one. So if you know the answer, just say it. So he said, how do we arrive at a model or prophecy? And he said, well, it's 90%. Does anyone remember what it was? And 10% something else.
90% external and 10% internal.
10% structure.
That's not what he said. He said 90% words, and I'm standing in the way. I know where you're going there, Molly, but no, the Parminder actually said 90% words. Sorry, I keep interrupting. Someone was going to say.
Is it 10% structure?
10% structure. Okay. Now, okay, let's just straight off the bat explain. These are symbolic numbers. So 90%, 10%. If you get to the principle of it, it's basically saying it's mostly about the words. You need to spend most of your time there, develop the story, and eventually you'll get into a structure. That's what it's saying. It's not saying 90%, 10%. Symbolic numbers to represent a principle. Okay, so the words were broken up into. Where do we spend our time? Book?
The Bible.
Yeah.
And
So that's right. So we'll go, okay. So it's words, but it's we'll go, I'll do that a bit differently. I'll go, all right. So clearly it's about a book. And we've got Bible already. Where else do we get the words from? Okay,
Nature.
Spirit of prophecy. Thank you. But the Bible and the Spirit of prophecy aren't the only book, are they? What's another book?
Book of Nature.
Yes, thank you. The Book of Nature. And Elder Parminder explained it this way. Nature it's plants, it's seasons, it's animals, but in nature is human beings. So we're part of nature. And so if you develop that logic right through, what we're actually talking about is the world. All the things that are happening in the world. It's nature. It's the toing and froing of what's happening. Now, that's what Elder Parminder would say. Now, if we go to structure, what does that mean? What's a structure in our context? What does a structure mean? What does it give us?
Line.
Yes, lines. Yep. So we'll go, say, waymarks, and it gives us lines. Very good. Now, if we went back into a number of years ago, Elder Tess said a very similar thing. What did she say? Elder Parminder said that, but remember what Elder Tess said. She said a very similar principle. She'd say 90% something, 10% something else.
90% history, 10% Bibles.
Yes, sort of. She said 90% history.
10% application.
And 10% application. Can you see they're saying the same thing? They're saying the same thing. This is the application. This is crawling through the mud to try and get the model. When I say mud, I'm saying this is delving into history. This is delving into current events. This is delving into the Bible and the spirit of prophecy to try and develop a model that can be used in a structure. Everyone okay with that so far? So that's to start with. Then Elder Parminder said, well, that's all fine, but what actually what's the most important part? We'll start with that. What separates this movement from everywhere else?
Structure.
So I hope everyone heard that. It was John said structure. So what we see is the most important thing is the structure. Okay, so that's the most important thing. But there's not a chance you can even get to here unless you do 90% of the work here. You just can't, you need the words, you need all that to develop that. But the power and the strength is in the structure. But it's more than that. And Elder Parminder explained it this way. He says, well, okay, now you've got your model. You've done this, you've got that. Now what gives that integrity is his word. I'll say what gives it strength that we can actually rely on, and Elder Parminder will say it stands the test of time. What actually enables it to stand the test of time? To know that what we've got here, this model is accurate and we know it's true. He gave us some examples.
Multiple witnesses.
Yeah, which is another parabolic method, is the testimony of two. And he said it this way. He gave us some examples. He went back into history and he gave us 3 studies. All right. One was Matthew 13. And that's the wheat and tares. So that's one. Second one was steps of salvation, 7 steps. I'll just say 7 steps of salvation. And that was the nature of humanity, or the nature of Christ. I'll just do that to summarize. And the third one was Revelation 14. Actually, first, second, and third angels' messages. All right. So this was done, each one of these was done using hundreds of hours here. And they eventually managed to place it. They went to number 1. They developed that story. They developed the model and placed it on this structure. Then they went to the 7 steps of salvation, the nature of humanity, placed it on this same structure. So when I say, actually, I'll say that differently so you understand the point I'm making. They did the wheat and tares and they built a model. So they'd spent 90% here and then it went, okay, there it is. Then they developed the 7 steps of salvation. Totally different story, got nothing to do with each other. They put it on a model. The first, second, third angels' messages. Then they grabbed that story, totally independent of the first 2. Put the story on a model, on the structure. When you can grab 3 totally independent stories that have nothing to do with each other, and they can model over exactly the same structure, that's what gives it strength and power, and it will stand the test of time. That's what gives it integrity, because if you, say, grab a story and you're developing something here and you go, oh, I want to grab that and put it on a structure. But then you can't grab that and overlay it. There's no other story. It stands alone. It's on itself over in the corner there. There's no other separate story or separate method or model you can't grab and then overlay on that. It doesn't have the strength to stand and continue to stand, because it's only the testimony of one. That's
Brenden,
why, yes.
I've kind of a two-part question here. First part, would you say this is an example of lateral reading in a way?
Yes,
And I guess I'll put the
to a
second part with
degree.
it.
I think.
It's
I'm not sure.
yeah. One of the things that I've seen in this in parables is the way that when you get three things like this that look completely different, it inhibits your ability to have a preconceived idea and go from two things that look quite similar. When you've got three very different things like this, it kind of, it's a bit of a safeguard against just defaulting to our preconceptions on given topics. And I think that's one of the powers of parable teaching.
Yeah, it's a way of keeping us safe. I agree. I'm not sure how to answer the lateral reading part yet. Can I think about that and get back to you?
Sorry, bit of a curveball.
That's okay. It sounds right, but I'm not sure. So Elder Parminder's examples. But let's just briefly talk about a few others. So what's another one? So Acts 27. So if I went, let me do this a bit differently. I'll rub them out because I'm going to run out of room, but I'll just do this. Okay. Okay. Time of the end. Time of the end. So here we've got two different ships. There's so many things we could talk about here, but we're not going to. But again, it doesn't look exactly like that. However, we've got two different ships on the same structure, saying the same things. So if I went there, so when Elder Tess went through all this work and she just put it on a structure, she realized that they were two different ships, two different stories, doing two different things, but they modeled exactly the same way. One was a bit longer, but the model's the same. And so even saying that, we could go further with Acts 27. We could go, oh, we've got 273. And then that takes us to we've got the history of Pyrrhus in Macedonia. We've got Pyrrhus in Italy. Totally different stories, different times. We've got Russia in World War II, sorry, and Russia today. 4 totally independent histories. Are they linked? Sort of, yeah. Chronologically, some of them, these two, but independent histories. Elder Tess went through all the words, took a crazy amount of time and effort and pain and found out that they actually work their way out on a structure. And those structures will stand the test of time because they are identical to each other and they explain the history we're living through now from the King of the South's perspective. The point of this is when people are developing stories here and trying to place them here, we need to know how to sift. And this is just a very initial stage of how Elder Parminder was explaining how parable teaching works in his mind. Again, we could keep going. We could go to the revolutions. We could just keep going. Unbelievably, incredibly, mind-blowingly accurate to each other, but completely different histories, nothing to do with each other. So much so that November 9 links them all. They're so accurate to each other. There's revolution, counter-revolution, so on and so forth. The models are incredibly accurate to each other and they can be laid over and over and over. Totally different stories. If Elder Tess started looking at the French Revolution, she would just build that and go, oh, that fits that way. Then she's over here and doing the German Revolution, go, oh, that goes there. But bring them all together and they just lock in. Gives it integrity. All right, I'll stop there and we'll move on. Okay. Now I've lost my spot, but that's okay. Okay. So in summary, what gives a study credibility to make sure you're correct so you can be confident is its ability to overlay a completely different model, different story over each other like that. And the structures line up. You know it has to be correct. And Catherine's already explained that's the testimony of two. Something is established. Okay, so let's move on. So going back to these three here, Elder Parminder also explained some of the history surrounding the development of those three studies and how those three studies actually caused a shaking. So the balance of the two studies was about comparing and okay. Let me just write this down. So far, what we're going to focus on is three things. I know I've done three there, but we're going to focus on three things, and I'll put them up in this corner. The first one, so far, Elder Palmer has talked about methodology. The second thing that was discussed was when talking about developing these models and these stories and these truths, those truths caused a shaking. So we're going to have, how do you spell shaking? I think it is. It's not an E. Okay. Or we'll call it a separation. Yeah. Separation. That's what a shaking is, a separation. Okay. And so with the two studies that I missed, that I finally got to, talked about those two things, but the rest of those two presentations was focused on comparing and contrasting liberal feminism with radical feminism. So the third thing we're going to put here is, now I'm going to be very specific here and say trans-inclusive radical feminism. So parable methodology works by taking what you do know, we do know this, to explain something that you don't know. That's sort of how it works. So what happened, a deeper look at liberal feminism clarified and created a deeper understanding from my perspective of, and I guess what became clear and apparent to me is that it is not possible to fully live as a radical feminist on this planet. Now, that's what the conclusion I drew. We can have a heart and a mind change, and we can be a radical feminist in our minds and in our relationships and the way we act, etc., etc. But the definition of a radical feminist is to destroy the structure, bring it crashing down. That's the definition. And so if the structure of patriarchy is everywhere, and it basically says, I'll give you an example. So patriarchy says, as an example, okay, women, we will give you reproductive health care access, and we'll give you access to abortion. And that's all good. Then the system will go, no, only joking. We've changed our mind, and now you don't have access to abortion. We'll take that one back. So what part of the system says that they get to say yes or no to women? What part of the system say yes you can or no you can't?
Talking about government.
Yeah. John just said, are you talking about government? I'm saying, sure. There's a whole system that says, all right, you can go and do that, women. We're going to give you those rights. But now, no, we've changed our mind. Now we're going to renege. We've changed our mind. Now you're not getting them. So what part? There's a couple. There's multiple, but just give me an example of part of government that says we're going to change our mind. It's just happened a couple of years ago, like as an example. It's happening all the time.
Judicial system.
Very good, thank you. Judicial. So the judges, again, now they're saying, no, now you can't. So what does a radical feminist have to destroy?
The judicial.
Judicial system.
Becomes complicated, doesn't it? Because isn't it the laws of the land? But basically radical feminists saying, sorry, we're going to crash and burn the laws of the land, the judicial system, because you're all under a umbrella of patriarchy. So isn't it the judicial system that's holding back authoritarianism? To a degree? Isn't it the laws of the land presently that are, well, particularly in democracies, they're sort of holding in check. That's why they have to be overtaken. I'm just saying it's complicated. I'm not saying it's complicated. I guess the question is, how is it possible to live completely as a radical feminist? I understand that in our hearts and our minds and our behavior, sure. But the very definition of a radical feminist is to destroy the structure. And this is where Lynn's presentation that she was beginning about all the different forms of government and all the different models are important, I think, because as we move into the next dispensation, all those models of government are going to have to start interacting, and how are they going to come to terms with the Sunday law history, whether it's authoritarian all the way through to democracies.
Brenden, looking at the law, is the Ten Commandments patriarchy?
It's God's law. I'm going to say God has no intention of having his law anything to do with patriarchy. However, he's got to deal with, or God has to deal with humanity where they're at. So you'll see words in there from Moses that are sexist. But I'm going to say fundamentally no, as a principle. I'm happy to get help here, but I don't think so. Are you linking my my thing to say Lord needs to be overthrown? I'm saying on this planet, because it's bound by patriarchy.
Yeah, but when you look at the Ten Commandments, it sounds like this is given to men. This is no women there.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
About that? When Elder Tess took us through the historical progression, she was pointing out how God had to deal with humanity in its fallen state, and clearly scripture has been written by patriarchs, by patriarchal infested brains, minds, thoughts, if you like. So our job is to actually look back and try to see what, or understand perhaps more clearly what God's more pure intention might have been. So God's law is God's law, but that doesn't necessarily mean that sinful man represented it accurately in the full context of equality. I don't know if that helps at all.
Yeah, I thank you, Lynn. I mean, that's sort of what I was trying to say. You said it a lot better than I did, but at the end of the day, it's dealing with, we're on the Sabbath. Make sure you don't have your slaves working. Like, this is methodology that was addressed, a number of years ago. To correctly, it goes, whether it's Moses all the way to Spirit of Prophecy. I think our biggest problem is probably more the Spirit of Prophecy as opposed to Moses, because that's so much closer, and it's a lot harder for people to break her words down and correctly interpret those. Whether that's what the controversy was way back in time setting. Is that, I'm not sure whether I'm answering Molly, but that's are you okay with that for the moment?
Yeah, because I just look at the line of Moses was the line of failure, and our line is the line of success. Is it our job when you talk about the law being dismantled? Is it our job to put it in the structure, the real structure as we understand it now of parables, the way we can understand the law in the right way? Because it is like what Linda said, it's been written by patriarchy. and it presented that way. But is this movement being a successful movement will be able to, full application of it and interpretation of it in the right way because we have the right methodology?
If I was to think literally for a second and say, okay, this movement is going to destroy patriarchy. I'm not sure. I don't know. The future of that's too far away. So, I just don't see how a movement can uproot the judges in this present history and every structure on this planet. That whether that's a second advent thing where it all comes away and gets undone, and the statue of Daniel 2 gets blown away. But my point there was, and is just the definition of radical feminism. We can't destroy the structure. We can't destroy this planet's patriarchy. And I think it's part of the job of realizing that is to rip us off this planet. There's actually no home for a radical feminist on this planet. It just doesn't work that way, because your mind and your body and the way you behave is completely contradictory to the entire planet that is around you, right down to the very structure, the way the governments work, the everything. That's the point I was making.
No, I understand it now how you put it that way. Yeah, I can see it. Thank you.
No worries. So I'll keep going. It's our time. Okay. So I watched these two presentations, the ones that on the board, and I called Catherine and I said, am I hearing this correctly? And we had a discussion. And Catherine suggests, go and have a look at Aaron Sen's. He did a few videos, and it was on the shakings, and so that's what I did. I went away and started looking at Aaron Sen's videos, and very quickly lost my spot again. And so his studies were about the shakings and how they work, and the movement's history of the shakings. And I found them really important also. So I felt like when I was watching these, I'd heard them before. I felt like, oh, gee, I've heard some of this before. And I realized that Aaron was actually reviewing partly a series of Elder Parminder's from October last year, 2023, in California, Sacramento. And there was three of them. One was the enemy is within the gate. Everything that can be shaken will be shaken, which is what Aaron called his three presentations, 1, 2, and 3. But this is Elder Parminder's one. And like a vine, God will let the unripe grape fall away. Now, because of the timing, I haven't had much of an opportunity to really analyze these three, but I'm going to briefly explain what I understand so far, because it was a while ago and I literally watched them very quickly. So they're about, clearly just by the topics, they're about the shakings. Okay, so we know that it's about the shakings, and it was the history of them in the movement, and it identified that the movement is in crisis at that moment. And that was only October last year. So, and people will realize that most people didn't even realize there was a shaking, because people weren't a lot of people didn't realize. And Elder Parminder identified the movement is in crisis. This is October last year. So the movement is still in crisis. I don't think that has changed. So it was identified then, and I don't think anything has changed. Now, unlike shakings of the past, this one's very subtle, because no one appears to be leaving. And I'm hoping people start remembering this series, because in the past, a shaking would happen, then people would leave. Not really happening so much now. The shaking now looks like some people in the movement, they're here in body, but not in spirit. Now, what's the definition of that? What does that remind you of? Laodicean. You're here in body, but not spirit. Not heart, not mind, but your body's here. And Elder Parminder explained why. So the shakings of the past, they have a cover story. What's the cover story? So now we're going to start looking at how the shakings. We've looked at a little bit of methodology. We'll go into a lot more down the track. We want to look at, this is sort of an overview, sort of introductory thought. So shakings. The shakings of the past have a cover story. What's the cover story? Why do people... I've already sort of said why people leave. Remember, something like this comes out and then people go, oh, and people split over issues. So I'll just call them a doctrinal issue. I'll just keep going if people won't answer. So the cover story is, on the surface, we've got a doctrinal issue that people are struggling with. I'll give you an example. Back in 2014-ish, there was a discussion about Joel. And one group would say, the locusts equal Islam. And then the other group would say, no, the locusts equal Babylon. And so then they argue and they say, no, you're wrong. We're out of here. And so then they split. So if I was to look at the reasons why there are a shaking, they mainly have two characteristics. One is methodology, the way you read, interpret, and they disagree on what that's supposed to equal, which is why Elder Parminder right now, at the borders of the Sunday law, is saying, by the way, everyone, we need to refocus on methodology, because every shaking that's ever occurred is surrounded, and one of its cover stories is a doctrinal issue because people don't agree with how we arrive to a certain conclusion, which is pure methodology. So I'll just say one, the reason there's a separation is methodology. And I think we all mostly know that, I hope. Even some of us experienced that, or if we came into the movement later, we've been made aware of some of these separations that have happened a long time ago, or even recently. But behind the cover story, there's also something else. What's behind the cover story? There's always interpersonal issues. So what's that sound like? It's like fighting for power or something like that. So that looks like attack on leadership. We could call it organization if you like. Hen's not doing great, but their time. Okay. you know, when you watch a presentation, because then Elder Parmenter explained, he went into detail here and he explained what the underlying reason is. And you know, when you watch a presentation at the time, you go, oh, yeah, yeah. And you're sort of watching it like that. And this is what Graham did the other day. I like it. So you're watching a presentation and you see that. And then you watch it again because you're prompted by some way. And then you come back to the presentation and now you're seeing that. Something, it's like you didn't even watch it. Something totally different. And that's what I felt like when I went back and saw this. And it was only just recently. So when I went back, the way Elder Parmenter explained this, okay. The underlying cause of, so this is about separation, the shaking. What causes people to separate, even though we've got these two things, they're there, that's the two main characteristics. I think there's more, but we'll just stick with those two for the moment. Underneath that there's this reason why it keeps happening. And he explained it this way. The underlying problem is some people just want to have a personal experience with God instead of a group experience. So what does that mean? So when you think about every model that we've ever looked at, all the models that we're familiar with, whether it's, you know, even our primary structures, we've got 144,000, we've got the priests. Is that an individual thing? Or is that a group thing? Think about all the models of the past. Everything is group. That you're going to struggle to find a model that supports an individual. I have access to God and I'm going to learn God on my own.
Just going to say, if you're an individual, then that's not a quality.
And so at the borders of the Sunday law, we've got some characteristics. And what was identified in October last year that went straight over my head is the cause of not just the present shaking, but every other shaking that's ever been, is this desire to have your own personal experience with God, where you learn about God in your own way, outside of a group. And when you think about these lines, they lay out how salvation works, how you become saved. It's always in a group setting. Salvation works based on how, by the group. You're saved as a group. You go into Noah's Ark as a group. The clean and the unclean animals went in as a group. And I guess what has happened over the past 5, 6, 7 years, 10 years? What is society, COVID, I'll just say Satan in general, what has all that been trying to get us to do? We're sort of being pushed, the whole world's been pushed to a place where the whole globe has been pushed to a place and got us into an environment where we all can have access to God in our own way. Because now we're on Zoom, we just do our thing, or we get on our phones. It's been separating. It's been trying to. What's the phrase?
The new guru
Divide and
AI.
conquer.
Divide and conquer. Separate and conquer. Separate the group into little individuals. So they can all have their own experiences. When I say their own experience, what I'm really referring to is their own way of learning God. Sorry, did someone want to say something? I interrupted. Thank you, Catherine, for answering that too.
No, I was
Nope.
saying the new guru is sort of. I remember Elder Babina study on that about the AI.
You're exactly right, Molly. You're exactly on the money, because that's exactly where this originated from. Elder Parminder identified something way back then that was going to cause a shaking. And that's exactly what I was going to say next. So we need an answer. Where do we go? Our iPhone. I'm going to say an individual phone. It doesn't really, but I'm just saying it's everyone now has access direct to the answers they want, and everyone can have their own personal experience outside of a group. And you're right, Molly, it's called the New Gurus. We should remember that. So we all have access to God. We all can experience our own individual flavor of God. And now back to the movement. So what does that actually mean? We were given examples of what that means. Because we have Zoom now, I'm not saying Zoom is bad, by the way. That's not what I'm saying. That's not the point I'm making. It's great that we have this technology that enables people all over Oceania to come together in one place and be a group. However, it's good, it's not so good. And the reasons are not so good is because all of a sudden, now you can attend church in your pajamas and start eating your breakfast. And that's the example that Elder Parminder gave. And I understand why he said that. Because if we're in a group setting, there's no way you'd be sitting there eating your cornflakes in church with 20 other people there. I think that's the surface example, all right? But so that's a literal example on the surface, but you got to think beyond that. So it's a mindset. So if you're going to have your own experience about how you want your day of God to work and your experience, that mindset translates to how you fundamentally operate here and here. Because if you want to get access to God on your own terms with your own experience outside of a group, without that prompting to keep you accurate, you're going to end yourself in trouble.
Brenden, I think it's also open up the gate for anybody to design their own God.
Yes. Thank you, Molly. So I'll say it this way. It's a mindset. So you could have a personal experience with God, developing a doctrine or belief or prophecy. So you can learn about God on your own by yourself. Now that's danger. Remember, all these are prophetic. All these lines are prophetic. The group is there by design. We're saved as a group because if you got your own thing and you're doing your own thing, you're not going to do very good here, and you're going to end up separated like every other group that's been confronted with an issue, and they've wanted to have an individual experience the way they want to do it, and then they've separated. A little testimony, I don't know whether it's going to help people, but one thing I developed very early when I joined this movement was I was, like everyone, I was challenged by some of the things that came through. I'm going, whoa, wow, okay, all right, let's confront this one. And so I did, And you know what? Every single time, the answers eventually come. I'll sit there and go, I don't understand this. I've got no idea what's going on here. I don't like it. However, every single time to this moment, I've just hung around to make sure that I've been here long enough to hear the answers being, and when it comes in a structure like this, whether it's been elder test, laying out the history of radical feminism, or going all the way back to ancient Greece and flowing. When it comes, it's powerful because it has all this behind it. So I just want to encourage people that if you're struggling with certain things or you don't have the answers, they always come, they always have. And I just have that level of faith personally because it's happened many, many times. So I just don't even question it now. I know, oh, yep, okay, a doctrine's come out because a truth has come out. I go, yep, okay. And then the answers come, and it's like a melody when it comes. Anyway, I'll move on. So Elder Parmenter explained that the underlying cause of every shaking in this movement is that some people want to have an individual experience or learn about God by themselves. And so when you look at that or that, you could probably draw a structure like this and say, okay, here's a shaking. All right. From that shaking, there's cover stories, there's reasons for it. One of them's like, okay, methodology. Whoop. Another one is an attack on leaders. So I'll just say leadership or organization. But underneath that, what the real issue is that undergirds all that is an individual experience. Learn about God on your own. I'll just say individual. All right. Individual experience. Even think logically for a second. Imagine you're trying to develop a study and you're left to your own devices. How well do you think you're going to go? But this is what people have done in the past, and that's why you end up with, okay, the movement or the leader says this, and no, hang on, the locus, hang on, in Revelation 9, the locus equal Islam. So in Joel, they have to equal Islam. Whereas if you spend 90% of your time here, you realize that the context is actually Babylon. It's the king of the north, has nothing to do with Islam. So you can very quickly, on your own, go completely off the rails, even just here, let alone trying to develop an application. It's about the group. Okay. Here's a quote from Elder Parminder from 21st of October. He said, this idea of an individualized salvation tailor-fitted for every single one of us is problematic. Why is it problematic? And then he says it's these pesky iPhones enable this. You have a challenge in front of you. He's talking about the people in the room, which is us now. You have a challenge in front of you, not to judge one another, to understand that salvation is an individual experience. What he means by that in the context is we will enter heaven at different stages of development. So that's what he means by that, because we'll all enter heaven at different stages. So our experience will be different to each other. All right. And yet we have to do it all together because we can't do it on our own. Has to be group. So all of these competing theological issues are a reality for everyone in this room. Okay, so now it's our time. Let me just do one more thing, because Elder Parminder isn't here at the moment. He's not with us at the moment. We can talk about him and he won't get embarrassed. Why is Elder Parminder unique? What is it about Elder Parminder that's unique?
He's been in the movement from the very beginning,
Thank you, Lynn.
from 1979.
Yeah, I'll just start at
And
1989.
1980.
If you're okay with that.
Yeah, I probably should have said that, but
That's okay. Okay. Yes, you can thread Elder Parminder from 1989 right through to the Second Advent. So let's do that briefly, just so if people aren't familiar. So let's go to 4 BC. Let's go to the Omega of ancient Israel. What do you see at 4 BC? You see John the Baptist born and Christ. So you see the first and second angel. All right, so you see, I'll just put P, Elder Parminder. Okay. Okay, so we get to the dispensation of, let's just break this up a little bit. Let's put our waymarks in. We get into the history of, all right, this is 09, 12, 14, 19, 21. I'm combining lots of things here, all right? So normally the line of the 144,000, yeah, I'm being a bit cheeky and lazy. It would only see, you'd only have visibility of there, and then you'd have the increase of knowledge at 2019, 21, Sunday law, so on. But I've been a bit cheeky and I've just slotted in the priest line here as well. Just if you could give me that allowance, latitude. Okay, so because here really is the history where Elder Parminder is going to work, really. He develops time, and in 2014, he predicts from 12 to 14, he predicts the Sunday law of that history. Okay. This history, what was supposed to happen is the first angel is supposed to go down and the second angel was supposed to increase. And the change of leadership was supposed to happen at 2014 and Elder Parminder was supposed to go on. Now, we know the history didn't work out like that, but that's by design. The structure was supposed to happen that way. So the change of leadership was supposed to happen at 2014. All right. Then let's just, now we're talking prophetically. Great controversy. GC 338 at the Sunday law. Revelation 18, 1 to 3. Second angel's there as well. And and then we get to the loud cry here. And that's when Revelation 18, verse 4 happens and onwards. So verse 4 onwards, you got the second angel empowered. This is, it's just demonstrating that from the beginning to the end, you see this second angel. Now, why? What's going on here? Why? I say, why does Elder Parminder go from the beginning to the end? And don't give, and before I'm going to trip everyone up, you're not allowed to say because the line says so, because that's a bad argument. We need to know what's behind the line. Why is that the case? Why does Parminder get to do the whole?
Because God put him there. God put him there to do a job.
Why? Why stop Jeff? Because God said, Jeff, all right, you've done a good job, but we've got to stop you now. You can't take it any further. But Parminder, you keep going and you just keep going. Why?
Because the structure of the line have to be equal. When you go to the history of ancient Israel,
Yeah,
we have to look at it. Yeah.
Yep. So you've just given me the argument that I said not to give, because I said you're not allowed to say because the line says so. So we want to step in behind that and say, well, why does God trust Parminder to keep going and doesn't trust
Because
Jeff?
he uses the right methodology.
Methodology.
Yes. When you look at it from that perspective, it's about the method. It's I'll give you an example. Jeff got stopped. Elder Parminder and Elder Jeff. Elder Jeff got stopped. All right. So I'm not saying God's saying this. I'm just saying what I'm saying to get a point across. So God's saying, Jeff, you silenced Parminder when I tried to introduce time setting into the movement. You tried to stop that message getting out. Then, when you didn't hand over the mantle when you were supposed to, then when you left, you started endorsing and creating prophecy about bombs in Nashville. So, right through this history, it's about delivering a message that is accurate based on correct methodology that will stand the test of time, that can be relied on. Because imagine developing a message on shaky methodology that isn't authorized or sanctioned by Elder Parminder, because he's the one that can be trusted with this methodology. As a group, that's why we're in training. Imagine getting to here with the latter rain. So here's the sprinkling, here's the latter rain here, and the messages come, they don't get audited, by correct, accurate methodology, and then that unaudited message gets delivered at the loud cry to the Nethinims. You can see it's not just because the line says so. I know the lines say so, but we need to know why the lines say that. And it's all about that. Every shaking that's ever happened has because people have not correctly used methodology. Now we keep saying that, but we need to break this methodology down as best we can so we don't fall foul of that. And I'm just going to stop now, but I guess the point here is the models show it's not a great choice to go against leadership when these shakings happen. I know the models say that God trusts Elder Parminder to deliver correct methodology right through to the second advent. So I'm not saying can't ask your hard questions and all that sort of stuff. That's what camps and schools are for, and emailing, but make no mistake, you don't want to be, you're asking for trouble if you're going against leadership when that's the model God has provided. Okay, so I'll stop there. That's our introduction. And in summary, we're going to focus on 3 topics: methodology, shaking, and radical feminism. And the next step we want to go into is why. Why is that important right now at the border of the Sunday law? Why do we need to get this absolutely crystal clear right? We are in a shaking that appears to be invisible, but it's not, because people are separating while being present. Okay? We've got 1,000 people in this movement. And where we're heading next is the Sunday law, which is Daniel 11:41, where many are overthrown. So that's where we're heading. We want to understand why we need to understand all this. So I'll stop there. Has anyone got any thoughts or questions? Actually, let's close in prayer, and then I'll open it up for any questions or comments. So join me in a prayer, please. Dear God in heaven, we thank you for this Sabbath day. We thank you for our group, this movement, the relationships we have with each other. Help us to press together and understand where we are. There's many distractions, there's many things going on in all of our lives. There's many struggles, varying degrees of pain from just about every person in this movement. We just pray for peace and joy as we go through this time. We leave ourselves in your care for the rest of the Sabbath, and we thank you for the privilege of experiencing all these truths as a group. In Jesus' name, amen.